You're listening to the winning literary show, Off the Shelf Books Talk Radio, live with host Denise Turney, author of the books Long Walk Up, Portia, Love Pour Over Me, Spiral, Love Has Many Faces, and Rosetta's Great Hope. Turn up your dial and get ready for a blast of feature author interviews, 411 on book festivals, writing conferences, and so much more. Ready? Let's go.
The show now. Nothing is particularly hard if you break it down into small jobs. And to our off the shelf listeners, that quote is the source is anonymous, but I just want to repeat that again. I like to start our shows with a thought, something that helps you can think about through the day, through the week. Maybe there's something you want to do. I know January the 1st is. Oh, we already into March, right? Before you know it, this year's gonna be over. I mean, it's gonna. So you have to daily just stay focused on what it is you say you want it to do. So at the end of the year, you will actually have done it. And sometimes, if you have a big dream, it just looks like too much. So nothing is particularly hard if you break it down into small jobs or small steps. And to our loyal listeners, been with us for 18 years. We started out on real live radio the station was headquartered out of New York City, Rainbow Soul with that smooth jazz. Then we went over to Blog Talk Radio, and now we are I record on Podbean, and then we the show actually goes out on Spreaker, iHeart, which is a huge company, iHeart Radio platform. So I want to welcome you. The 18 years, I always say thank you, thank you, thank you to those who have been with us the entire way. And if this is your first time listening to Off the Shelf, I just want to welcome you, and I'm so delighted to have you here with us for our March the 8th, 2025 show. We have an awesome author on deck for you, and excited to introduce you to the author. But before I do, and had the honor of being featured in, I hope I'm saying it right, Sanye magazine. It's an amazing magazine, and was in the March feature of that magazine. And the book that's also in there with the interview uh, on yours truly is Heal Gorgeous Wisdom Within You Knows the Way. It's hard to believe on some days, some periods, some seasons of life that the guidance you need is actually a part of you, is within you, and we have to get still to tap into it. If that's something you are interested in, or you feel like, oh my God, I'm at a place in my life where I absolutely need that. And this is a book with short writings, the poems, things that really get you to thinking without raising those mind defenses, so you can receive it much more easily. I'll encourage you to get a copy. It's in ebook and in paperback of Heal Gorgeous, Wisdom Within You Knows the Way. And it's, again, you can go to, you want to read free excerpts, you can just go to my website at Chistel, CHISTELL.com, and you can get free excerpts of it. Again, Heal Gorgeous, Wisdom Within Knows the Way by Denise Turney. And now, this is what you all came over here for. Let us go and meet our very special off the shelf guest. And this morning's guest is Lola Reid Allin. And she just told me she's way up there near, I forget the exact place, but she'll tell us when we kick off the show, in Canada. And Lola is an author. She is amazing. I learned so much from all these interviews and researching for them. When I researched for her show, I was like, wow. She is an author, pilot. She's a photographer and an adventurer. And during her explorations, Lola has visited more than 60 countries. Wow, that's impressive. Talk about being a passionate traveler. She gets out. Places she has visited include Istanbul, Nepal, Morocco, Chile, Peru, and the Himalayas. She is a speaker with the Northern Lights Aero Foundation, Eastern Ontario 99's Education and Outreach Committee, and the Women's Travel Network, Books she has written include Highway to the Sky. I love that title. Highway to the Sky, an aviator's journey. I encourage you to check Lola out online at Lola Reid Allin. She kept it simple.com, and that's spelled LOLAReidallin.com. And again, LOLAReidallin.com. Now, here's the great thing about the show. You can actually go over to her website right now as you listen to her on today's show. We're absolutely honored to have Lola Reid Allin join us on Off the Shelf Books Talk this morning. Welcome, welcome to Off the Shelf, Lola.
Well, thank you so much, Denise. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here from cold but very sunny Toronto, Canada.
Oh my goodness! I when I was researching for your show, I said, "Oh wow, just inspiring." Some people, the way they live their lives, just the way they live is an inspiration. I was just very inspired. The first few questions I'm going to ask you, I ask every guest who has come on, and we've interviewed New York Times best-selling authors. We've been so blessed. We've interviewed people who are movie producers, actresses, business owners who've written books, and so you're joining a very elite line of guests here on Off the
Well,
Shelf.
thank you.
So,
Thank you.
to kick off today's show, can you tell us, our Off the Shelf listeners, where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up?
I grew up in Belleville, Ontario, which is on the north shore of Lake Ontario, just sort of north of Syracuse, Buffalo, Rochester, in upstate New York. So I grew up on the north side of Lake Ontario in a small town, 30,000 people, even small even for Canada, and we're just east of Canadian Forces Base Trenton. And that was really inspiring because at that time in 1959, the Canadian Armed Forces, the Royal Canadian Armed Forces, formed the first aeronautical group, the Golden Hawks, and they flew F-86 Sabres. And so Belleville, my hometown, was just about 10 miles east of Trenton. So I'd see these planes flying overhead, and that was so inspirational, so exciting. And they would actually also perform at the Belleville Fair, which was pretty fun. It was basically just doing takeoffs and landings and a few passes. It was just good practice for them too, I think. But in 1962, I was also inspired to become a pilot. My parents took my sister and me out west for a family reunion, and we weren't terribly rich, but this was a big event, or this was a big event. Even if we'd been rich, I think in 1962, people just didn't hop on airplanes the way they do today. But my folks saved up, and it was probably cheaper than driving out west to the annual family reunion. Anyway, it was an epic flight. It was so much fun. I loved it. It was late August, early September, lots of thunderstorms. For me, it was like a ride at the fair. My mom chain smoked the whole way, I think, because of course you could smoke, and my dad too even took a cigarette, and he'd actually quit smoking. So I think it must have been pretty rough, but I loved it, and I expressed my desire to fly as a pilot when I grew up. And my dad said, "Don't be silly. Girls don't fly airplanes." And he was, in part, he was right. There really weren't many female pilots, even though the first licensed female pilot was Ramon de la Roche, March 8th, 1910, in France. Only 7 years before the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, women just didn't quite keep up with the number of men who were flying. So there really weren't that many women that he had seen. Probably a few in World War II. Of course, America had the WASPs, the Women Air Force Service pilots. But after the war, they were, because they were considered volunteers, they were sent back home. And so the men, the pilots, and the factory workers got back their old jobs. So I really was pretty discouraged by that. And but that was the atmosphere that we kind of all grew up in. We might have had a dream, but for girls, we didn't really expect to go flying through the skies or design rockets. I mean, yes, sure, there were a few absolutely notable women, but they, whatever reason, made them much more motivated than I was. I'm not sure, but I didn't start flying until age 24, the same year, same age as Amelia Earhart started.
Oh, she's a hero. One
Yeah.
of my yes. Oh my goodness. And so that putting that in perspective, a perspective, and I appreciate you doing that. I had recently watched this show, and it was they were saying that if you were born, I guess in maybe the 80s or later, you probably don't really appreciate or understand how years ago women were expected to. It shows in the United States and in Canada, if you could share some of those titles, but here it was like Leave It to Beaver, and I wasn't born in my parents were Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best. You had to look perfect as a woman. I mean, you had to have the perfect body, your face, your hair. I mean, you had to look perfect all the time, and you could take college courses on. I think my grandmother told me this, like how to prepare a meal. I just that to me is so absurd. But that was the most you would hope for, is to hopefully get married and be a wife and a mother, and that's it.
Well, that's right. In fact, I don't know about in America, but I imagine it's the same. Women were said to go to university or college to get their MRS degree, as in their Mrs. Status. So,
Mm.
and certainly there were some women who went to university or post secondary education for other reasons, but quite often you did wind up getting married. And even though you might have a degree, you wound up getting married. And once you had children, you often were expected to stay home. My own mom worked in or with the Canadian National Railway, which was then a Crown corporation owned by the government. And when she got married in 1947, she had to quit her job, not when she got pregnant, but when she got married, because her boss said married women belong at home looking after their husbands.
Wow.
Yeah. And I have this PowerPoint presentation that I've actually done 4 times this week in various places in Ontario. And one of the slides shows a woman vacuuming, and I've got all dressed up, just absolutely perfect with
Yes,
an apron to
yes.
protect her outfit. She's wearing
Mm-hmm.
high heels. Who vacuums in high heels? I'm sorry. I do vacuum, but I don't wear high heels. Anyway, so there's a little quote beside it that says, make sure everything about yourself is perfect. A clean house and a good supper or a delicious meal aren't enough. You have to look perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And your expectations, if you worked, and you were allowed to work in many cases. My mom transitioned from the Canadian National Railway to becoming a legal secretary because, unlike a lot of women, she actually had some post-secondary college education. A lot of women in 1940s. But we were expected, maybe you could become a teacher, a nurse, rarely a doctor, and a flight attendant, or then they were called stewardesses because the gender was still attached to the job itself, unlike today when they're flight attendants. So there were options for women, but they were really called forced choice options. If the men in your class, or the boys in your class, I guess, and I know some of them, I'm sure, were smarter than me, some weren't as smart, but they were looking forward to a life of sort of doing
Mm-hmm.
what they wanted. If they wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, an engineer, plumbers, electricians, but women just didn't do that. Things are changing though, because we don't hear firemen, policemen, too much anymore. Occasionally, it kind of slips out, but generally, we've tried to remove gender from the job, and I think if that's certainly a step in the right direction.
Oh my goodness. I want to ask you this. And again, you just are an inspiration that you had that thought in you to do something you might have seen very, very few women doing. Do women still make up only 5% of the world's pilots, even after all these years?
Yes, the commercial pilots. There are more women today are flying. So let's say there might have been 40,000 flying in 1960 throughout the world. And I'm just pulling that figure out. So our numbers have increased since that. But male pilots' numbers have also increased. So the percentage of commercial pilots who are female still hovers at about 5%. There are some exceptions. Uh, India, Ireland, and Iceland have the highest percentage of female pilots. Yeah,
Wow.
interesting, eh? So America has the most female commercial pilots. So, but by percentage, those three countries, India, Ireland, and Iceland, in that order, with India having 12.7%
Go India. Oh my!
pilots.
I have never in my life seen a female pilot when I got on a plane. I think I would pass out.
Well, yes, it is unusual. And we do now really try to make ourselves much more visible in the sense of, when the passengers are boarding or offboarding, the pilots would often stand and, and greet the passengers or say goodbye, hope you enjoyed a good flight, or invite kids up to the cockpit. Now that doesn't happen so much anymore, but it does occasionally post flight. Little children, boys and girls, will be invited into the cockpit because we don't need to change the attitudes just of little girls. Little girls know that they are capable of doing these things. It's just society often can be pretty oppressive when the toys for girls are very female centric. Not all of them, for sure. I have a doll that's dressed in a pilot uniform, a Barbie doll dressed in a pilot uniform called Captain Barbie. So that kind of thing is important. My granddaughter wanted, let me see, pediatrician Barbie. So I gave her pediatrician Barbie for her birthday. So there are toys around that are changing, but there's still that when you go into a toy store, you go into Walmart or a toy store, very clearly you can see these are toys for little girls,
Hmm.
these are toys for little boys. But there is a great website called Mighty Girl. Not sure if you're familiar with it. The toys are fantastic. And I should say the
Oh,
selections on Mighty Girl are
okay.
fantastic. Now, anybody can order from it, of course, but it's a selection of books, dolls like Captain Barbie, Pediatrician Barbie, um, interactive toys like Meccano.
I gotta check that out.
Oh, it's a fantastic thing. And what's really great about it is it's an American site. So it's Mighty Girl, spelled exactly the way you would spell it, mightygirl.com. And I'm not in any way affiliated with them, by the way. It's just such a great site. And you go on the site and it's categorized, and they have great books about, women who've done amazing things throughout the world and throughout history. And then you click on the book and it'll tell you where you can buy it. So you can buy it through amazon.ca, for example. So it's just a collection of these great toys, which are for boys and girls, but focusing on girls. But I love doing, presentations like this, podcasts like this, because it's not just girls. We need to change the attitude of moms and dads and boys and girls to
Mm,
make it a more inclusive, equal opportunity. Not every girl wants to fly airplanes, just like
mm,
not every boy wants to fly airplanes or design
mm,
rockets or work for NASA. But there are some, and for those who do, they need to know that it is possible. And I love the quote, by the way, that you started with, because that's exactly right. If I had taken my first flight lesson and thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to fly that big airplane, I would have quit. It's just like thinking
mhm,
about if you start at college or university, and on, let's say, in the first week, you start worrying about whether you're going to pass your fourth year finals. You're going to be so oppressed and so burdened with
mhm.
worry
Yeah.
that you're going to drop out. So yeah, you need to you block it, in small chunks. I'm going to get through this test and this month and this semester. Or in aviation, I'm going to do my first solo, which is usually, I don't know, it varies 16 to 30 hours. I'm going to I'm going to fly that airplane solo. Then I'm going to get my private license, and then my night rating, and then my commercial license, and then maybe my float rating, or skis. And then, well, I'm doing okay. Maybe I'll get an instructor rating. I'll get a job flying floats or working on the ramp somewhere. And maybe you'll find that actual flying isn't for you, but you want to go to university or you want to join the military, and you've already sort of got a foot in the door because you've got all that aviation experience, and maybe they'll put you in aeronautical engineering, right? So you just never know where life will take you, but you want to keep all your doors open.
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness, yes. I have read about Amelia Earhart. You mentioned her earlier in the show, and in the book, if I remember correctly, she said she really tried hard to be interested in like the typical being a growing up and being a housewife, but it just didn't appeal to her enough, and she tried to train and go to school for the traditional jobs for women, but she just never was able to. And I think it was initially. I hope I'm remembering it right. And if I'm not, I hope you correct me. I want to say it was her father. There was a male in her life who, when she said she wanted to fly, who encouraged her to go after it. I know one of her husbands, I don't know if it was first or second, who also encouraged her to go for it. Did you ever, on your way to where you went, or did you ever work a traditional job? Did you ever tell yourself, Lola, just try to fit in?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, you're absolutely right about Amelia Earhart. She was only married once, to the publisher G.P. Putnam. But she worked as a nurse in during World War One in Toronto. And then she went to, I believe it was New York City, and worked in the social working field, but was very interested in aviation. Now, interestingly, she had a female instructor, Netta Snook, which was quite unusual. But that would certainly be inspiring for sure. But for me, I worked in the bank. I started off as
Oh,
a teller
oh
for one
wow.
of our Canadian banks, and I worked up to be a supervisor, and then in the computer department. And I enjoyed it. I actually, when I was working in the computer department, the bank, sent me and several other employees to various cities and villages in northern Ontario, and my time was free after 4 p.m. each day and on the weekends, and so I would go flying, which was great. So I got a lot of varied experience in different regions. And that stood me in good stead. And when I said my job was interesting, it was. I liked it. I felt successful. But and when I took my first flying lesson, March 17th, in 1979, I never thought, oh, I'm going to quit my perfectly good job and go flying commercially. But pretty soon, and I don't know when, maybe 5 hours, 10 hours, it was like, wow, I'm really loving this. And again, it was, even though I didn't plan it step by step, that's how it worked out, right? It was like, okay, well, I'm going to go solo, and that was great. And then I got my private pilot license, and it just sort of blossomed from there. There was really no doubt in my mind that I would get a commercial license and hopefully have an aviation career.
I'm just so impressed because anybody hearing this now, if you were born 20 years ago or 25 years ago, they would be impressed, I think. But to the time and I'm just, there's something in you, a lot, you must have a lot of confidence somewhere in you. It really is looking out for you. So the next question I wanted to ask you is, could you please give us an overview of your book, Highway to the Sky, An Aviator's Journey?
Well, it obviously has something to do with aviation. There's me on the front cover, and it's a real photo. The background has been changed because I didn't land on snow in the forest, but there's a nice forest in the background, sort of like the setting sun or perhaps the northern lights. And I was in Whitehorse in the Yukon, almost in Alaska, actually, but in the Yukon. And I'd spent a week there getting my dog mushing license. So I just wanted to go flying, and I took this picture. And I actually thought I was writing about aviation. I thought, I'm a pilot. It'd be fun to write about aviation and talk about my struggles, the barriers I had, the encouragement, the challenges I had, but also the great reward of doing something different, of feeling successful, of flying an airplane and being able to control a big heavy piece of metal through the sky and then land it successfully. But I had a developmental editor, Sarah Chauncey, whom I highly recommend, originally from Boston, but now living on Vancouver Island in Canada, in British Columbia. And she said, Lola, you're not writing about aviation. And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm not writing about aviation? She said, you're writing about women's issues. And she was
Mm.
absolutely correct. And from that point on, I had real clarity. So she suggested that I start the book with what had been chapter 5. And so the book now starts with a student I have. And she's an older woman, that is older than the typical student, who's often maybe from age, I'd say the average age might be 18 to 30 for someone at that time starting flight lessons. Well, Joy was 56. And there were some problems. There were 4 instructors at our flight school, and the other 3 were men. And she had gone through all of them. And one day, our chief flying instructor, Martin, takes me into our private room. I was the assistant chief instructor, and he said, I don't know. I think I have to have a chat with Joy. She just can't land the plane. Well, that's obviously a big problem. You have to be able to land the plane. And the other instructors said, she's a nice lady. She's really determined. She wants to learn how to fly. And I knew that she'd also gone back to university. I also knew that her husband was World War II, or flew in World War II as a gunner on the Lancaster, and he was also a pilot post World War II. 2 of their children were pilots, and she'd gone to university, returned to university at age 55 to study creative writing, and she ultimately wrote 3 books about aviation. So I thought, this is an intelligent, determined woman. So I said, sure, I'll fly with her, because that's what Martin was asking. Would I fly with her? But I said, I thought she didn't want to fly with me. He said, yes, she didn't want to fly with you. Like everyone else, like many others, she thought I'd been hired to be politically correct. That is, there's a female on staff,
Yeah.
and so she thought that too. And it's an easy assumption, and yet with all the fuss that's been going on after the crash in Toronto with a female first officer, we're trained, we're tested over and over and over. Like every rating we get, we're tested every year. If you're flying commercially, you have a flight test every year. Not just can I take off and land this airplane, but you go through all of the emergency procedures and you pass or fail. And if you do have a fail, you get more training, and then you do the test, and then you pass, presumably. But you're tested annually on every aircraft. So if you're flying 3 different aircraft, you're tested on 3 different aircraft. It's pretty impressive. The training is amazing, and the currency requirements are amazing as well. So it was just sort of this easy assumption. And then she said, when we actually got to meet, she said she apologized. And I asked her what changed her mind. And she said, well, when I learned you had the same experience and ratings as my son. So this was an intelligent
Mm.
woman. So I took her flying, and she was great in the practice area. but she couldn't land the plane. So it was just a fluke. I was just about to think, to join the other three men who thought this woman should not be flying, when I happened to look over at her and I realized that she was so short, she couldn't
Ah,
see over the dash. So when we were flying in the air away from the ground, she had no problem. She was one of the best pilots I ever trained. But I turned to her and I said, Joyce, when we're about to land, when raise the nose wheel a little bit, it's called flaring. When you flare the airplane, the nose, so that the main wheels touch down first, can you see the runway? And she said, no, of course not. As if like, what kind of a moron do you think I am? You know, so then she pauses briefly and starts to laugh, and she says, oh, Lola, are
That's
you
it.
exhausted? I said, yes, it's quite helpful. I said, like you've been, yeah, it's like you've been driving a car on the road, but you can't see the road or any of the cars.
Wow.
And so we had to do 2 or 3 more hours of flying. That is to say, after we found booster cushions for her, we had to do 2 or 3 more hours of flying. So it cost her a bit more money, but she because she had to do more flying because now she had a different frame of reference out the windows. But my developmental editor, Sarah Chauncey, said this is a good way to start because it sets the tone. This is an older woman who has a dream, who's raised her children, been a great wife, but she wants to fly. And in that conversation before our flight with Martin, the chief flying instructor, he says to me, he asks the question, I don't understand why she wants to fly anyway. She has everything a woman would want. She has a
Mm.
beautiful house. She has a great husband. And all this was true, by the way. She has 4 wonderful kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. And guess which 2 were the pilots? You guessed it, the boys. Um, yeah. Although one was also a professor in Lafayette, at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette. But he was also a pilot. One flew commercially, one flew privately. But he said, I don't understand why she wants to fly. She's got everything already. And I said, well, if a 56-year-old man walked in here and said, I want to get my pilot's license, would you say, why do you want to fly? You just
Mm.
take him flying.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're all products of our environment. So these 3 guys, just like almost all of the guys I ever worked with, were nice people. They weren't horrible people by any
Right.
means, but their frame of reference, the shows they'd watched on TV, their friends, their parents' friends, it was all very traditional. The dad worked. The dad often had a professional job. The mom might work outside the house, in addition to working as a homemaker, but it was usually not for personal gratification, but for extra money. And I
Yep.
think, what do they call it? Pin money or something, to, buy extra things for the
Mm-hmm.
house, for herself. It was sort of like fun to get out of the house. And again, if that's what you want to do, I support you 100%. But my mother and father didn't want kids, but because of birth control issues in the 50s and 60s, they had 2 of them. Um, they were good parents.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't terribly loving parents, but they were good parents. They were stand-up people who did what was required of them and took us wonderful places. But if it hadn't been for my mother's father, my grandfather, and my grandmother, I think my life would have turned out very differently
Oh.
because my parents, I basically ruined their marriage. If you don't want kids and you envision a life that's very different without children,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have children, and I want to emphasize they were not bad parents. This is not a book of I got beaten up every night or
Yeah.
neglected or not fed. That's not it at all. But chose my journey maturing because of the dysfunctional relationship of my parents, and I suppose mine as a child of living in a dysfunctional marriage. No surprise here, I married a great guy who also came from a dysfunctional family and had substance abuse issues.
Uh,
So that's another talking point in the book. It's another takeaway of what do you do when you find out this wonderful man that you married isn't maybe quite so wonderful and doesn't have the great family background that you thought he had. His mom and dad were both professionals, and had a house, had an airplane, a small private plane, an Aranca Citabria, was a scuba diver, used to fly up to north into northern Canada and live with the Inuit. So he was a really interesting. My husband Paul came from a very interesting family, but one that was dysfunctional. So there's a little bit of domestic abuse, but it's just, I guess it's my story of wanting something that society said wasn't really for women, but just being determined and believing in myself and being confident and courageous in many cases to live that life that I wanted to live for myself, not the life that my mom and dad wanted for me or society or my husband or anybody, but the life I wanted to live. And there were challenges for sure, but I made mistakes, and I hurt a few people for sure, but I think I made the right decisions in the long run.
mhm.
Most of the decisions were the right decisions in the long run.
Now, somebody who gets a copy of Highway to the Sky and Aviator's Journey, is this going to be a book that is how much of it do you focus on aviation? You actually you talked about training an older woman, and that's how the book kicks off. But how much of it is devoted for our listeners to actually aviation? Because some people might have a passion for
Yeah,
aviation,
well,
and
in
then they might
everything,
want a
yeah,
more of an autobiographical.
yeah, so everything relates to aviation. So aviation, going solo, gave me more courage, gave me more confidence. And how did I use that? And it's the best way to describe it is aviation is the undercurrent. It runs through the whole book, but how I used my success and the confidence in myself to work through the challenges that I had as a mom, as a single mom, because my husband and I did split up, how I worked through those challenges as a single mom, how aviation empowered me, how doing something different than a lot of women was a challenge, in that some guys were kind of frightened off in the sense of, oh, I'm not sure I want to date her.
Mm.
But others were absolutely thrilled to know a female pilot, and how that worked to to make me a more rounded person. And everything during the book, I also work through my university degree, and how that increases my knowledge, and I build on that, and actually talk about that in my second book, how the information I learned at university in anthropology led me to my next career, which is doing ethnographic research in Mexico and Belize with the Maya. So I think the takeaway here is to believe in yourself. Don't listen to the naysayers, because there were lots of people, and there are still lots of people who will say, you shouldn't be flying, or women belong in the home. And in fact, the inspiration for writing this was a note that was left on a WestJet flight. And WestJet is one of Canada's air carriers, which is out in Western Canada. And the note, and I paraphrase, and this note was in 2014. It wasn't in 1979. It was in 2014. And there was the note to the female captain, and it read, "Dear Captain of WestJet, women have no place in the cockpit. We
Mm.
are short mothers and wives, not pilots. The next time WestJet has a fair lady at the helm, please let me know so I can take another flight.
Wow.
Yeah, that galvanized me. I thought, I need to write my stories, because at the time it was hard to imagine that the attacks weren't directed at me. And I mean the verbal attacks. And sometimes they didn't feel like attacks. They were almost like microaggressions. So for example, I'm standing on the ramp in the book, and one of our passengers approaches me, and I'm standing there wearing a pilot uniform with the stripes, and he says, "What are you serving for lunch?" And I said, "Well,
Mm.
actually, I'm not serving anything because I have to fly the airplane." I said, and I started to explain the stripes on my jacket. He said, "I know what those stripes mean. Didn't you just borrow that jacket?" I was
Wow.
astonished. And that kind of thing is still happening. People are saying, land at an airport, and people will say, men and women will say, "Oh, where's your husband or boyfriend, whatever?
Oh my
And
gosh.
where's the pilot?" And that happened in the 60s, the 70s, and it's still happening. So I because I knew that there were a lot more female pilots flying commercially, I was under the I'd misinterpreted it as the percentage had increased, and I was so wrong. And then I saw this note that was posted on Facebook, which is amazing because, of course, in the 80s and 90s, I wasn't, personal messaging my friends or
Mhm.
taking photos or with my iPhone. It just
Mhm.
didn't happen. I felt isolated. Now I think one of the reasons the book has been successful, and it's actually today on International Women's Day, it's number 55 on Amazon.com's. I,
Awesome.
I know,
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
I know, aviation and nautical bios. I was so
Oh
excited.
my
It's like,
goodness.
wow,
Awesome.
it's been there in February too. It's been up and down on the top 100 in aviation
Okay.
bios, but number 55 was pretty impressive. But I was shocked actually, but astonished. But I think one of the reasons for the success, it's easy to read. It's not an aviation primer. I do talk about some of the challenges that the plane hands to me. I have an electrical failure, I have a systems failure, no engine failures, but I take it more from the personal. What do I do in this case? What do I how do I interact with the captain or the other pilot? And it's more of it's a personal journey. It's not an aviation primer, but aviation drives the story forward, and it's considered most typical reviews are, well, get this book, or amazing for my perseverance and my determination. But that's what you do need almost in any job. You have to have passion. If you don't love aviation, you might get your private license, but you're not going to go through it. So it's just a journey of a woman who wanted to live her life and the challenges. And some of them were what I say, little microaggressions. Some people would, like the man on the ramp who was asking, "Didn't you just borrow that jacket?" He was
Mm.
a nice man. He was well dressed, well spoken, well groomed. He was a businessman coming up to northern Canada from Toronto. He genuinely thought I was the flight attendant, or stewardess in that case. And he also genuinely thought I'd borrowed that jacket. But that's kind of an assumption, right? Or
Mm.
if you're sitting in the airplane, in the captain or the first officer's seat, people will still say, "Oh, I bet you're saving saving that seat or sitting in that seat to keep it
Oh
warm for
wow.
the captain." It's like, wow, is that funny? And just
My
recently,
God.
I gave a presentation, several presentations this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for International Women's Day, and on Thursday, the woman who had invited me to the group. It was an extended learning opportunity just north of Toronto, extended learning opportunity group. And she, after the presentation, she said, I was telling a man who also was, well educated and well groomed, well spoken, a friend of ours, she said, about your presentation. And he said, "Oh, I bet they have to give women extra special maps so they can fly the airplane. And he
Wow.
laughed. And she said, that's not funny. All pilots need maps. He said, yeah, but extra special, maps so they know which direction they're going. And she said, that's not funny. He said, it's just a joke. And she said, it's not funny.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
genuinely thought it was funny. He was making a joke. So any kind of a put down like that, after a while, one or two, but the microaggressions can be very overpowering. But so I talk about them, and I also talk about the difficulties with my husband and the challenges of, as I say, being a single mom and being stalked. And he actually does become quite violent one time after we've separated. But that's the only episode of
Mm.
domestic violence, real domestic violence, and then challenges with boyfriends. So it's a very readable, personal story about one woman who just wants to fly airplanes.
Oh my
It
goodness.
could be. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, it could be just, the story of one woman who wants to live her life. Maybe that's being a doctor. Maybe that's being a lawyer. Maybe that's being a teacher. Maybe that's being a biologist. But there's so many careers, so many opportunities and there are not charities. There are organizations, support groups, Women in Aviation International, the 99s International Organization of Women Pilots, that will, when you join those groups, you can get scholarships, and it's also, you get the camaraderie of those groups. But I talk about aviation, but this could be a book for anyone, any girl or boy for that matter, who is interested in a career that's different from the population they're in, something different. They have a dream. Who knows why they have that dream? But that you can succeed. It's going to take determination and perseverance and passion, but you can do it. And speaking about toys, when I was a little girl, my two favorite TV shows, because we could actually get shows streaming up from Buffalo and Rochester, which was pretty cool. My two favorite TV shows, and both of them were on reruns. My two shows were Sky King, about a man named Skylar King who flew airplanes in
Hmm.
Arizona and saved people, and his niece, his sidekick, who also was a pilot. And the other favorite show was Sea Hunt with Lloyd Bridges, the dad of Bo and Jeff Bridges, and
Okay.
he was a scuba diver. And so, again, when I was watching those shows, I never thought, I didn't have a really conscious thought, I'm going to grow up and become a scuba dive master, or I'm going to fly airplanes. But somehow that was imprinted, that there was Penny and how exciting it was flying and how exciting it was scuba diving. So I actually wound up having both of those as careers. So you never know what's going to influence you.
Yeah, I want to definitely ask you. I want to talk about your photography next, but I wanted to ask you first before that for our listeners. I always like our listeners to walk away with something that they can take personally, and you've already given that into their life to help themselves. Um, so you face all these microaggressions and these comments, and just who knows what else went on that you might not even be aware of, where there was resistance. What
Mm.
was the one, if you had one to two go tos that you did? Some people it's meditating, some people it's talking to somebody. What were it like when you really started to feel like it's too much, the resistance? What was your one or two go tos that helped you to just keep moving forward?
That I never blamed anybody. I think there were days that I wanted to quit. There were days that I was crying, I'd not in front of people, but wow, this is really, really difficult. One particular instance, I was sitting in a parked airplane, getting familiar with the layout of the cockpit and the dashboard and all the bells and whistles. And I overhear a conversation outside the plane, a little, not immediately adjacent to the plane, but I think these guys had strategically placed themselves there to talk about me. But they weren't really talking about me. They were talking about women have no place in the cockpit. And what they actually said was boobs don't belong in the cockpit. And I bet she got hired so that the captain, the chief pilot, can take her to bed. I
Mm,
bet that's why she's been hired. Just like the last girl who didn't work out because she couldn't fly airplanes either. So this was very hurtful, but they'd never flown with me. So I think that these three pilots had never flown with me. So I think it was that kind of set the stage for me to understand, even though that was very hurtful and I cried and I went home and I cried, uh, it let me understand that they weren't upset with me. There wasn't anything I had done.
mm, mm-hmm,
So that was something I carried through my entire career, that it wasn't that they didn't like me. It was that they didn't think women in general should not be flying. And they thought that just based on the fact that they were a product of their environment just as much as I was. They had never seen a female pilot either, right? I mean, I was the
mm-hmm,
first female pilot. They were the
mm-hmm,
first female pilot that they'd actually met. I guess they'd seen a female pilot on TV or whatever.
mm-hmm.
But I was the first they'd ever met. So it was all new ground for all of us. What surprises me is it's still going on.
Mm,
Um, there was a young woman, Zara Rutherford, who at age 19 in 2022 flew around the world. So at the time, she was the youngest person to fly around the world. And what she said really surprised me. She said, growing up, so she was born in 2003. She was born in this century. She says, growing up, she didn't see many female pilots or computer scientists who were female. That
mm.
really surprised me. So that plus the fact that of the note to the WestJet pilot, I thought I should write this book to reach out to people to continue these conversations about what women can do and what we should be able to do to stimulate the conversations that exist, like the one we're having today. And I've had lots of good feedback from people who said it was validating, like young people
Yes.
younger than 25 who are
Mm-hmm,
getting their pilot licenses, and yet they're getting this pushback that says, women don't belong in a cockpit, or women shouldn't fly commercially, or as I heard from relatives and guys I flew with, women are taking jobs, or women shouldn't be taking jobs from men who need them to feed their family. And I said, wait a minute, I have a family, I have a son,
mm-hmm,
I need to feed him. What, I should
mm-hmm,
get a low paying job just because you want to fly? I don't think so.
mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, good for you. And I think it's the as we keep showing people what can be done. I mean, it's changed so much since the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. The jobs that women have today, and they're just like the WNBA here in the United States, that would have been no one would even have thought of that
Ooh.
several decades ago that could even be possible. So you just have to keep getting out there, and if you're worried about somebody taking your job, I guess you better step it up then. Because it's not like
That's
it's
right. And,
I'm
and
not
you're right.
stepping back so you can have
Yeah,
a
that's
job. I
right.
guess you better step it. If you
Yeah.
don't have the confidence and you're scared, I guess you better step it up. Now, how long were you flying when you started becoming interested in photography? And it's a two-part question. And can you tell us somewhere you flew and then you did photography that was just remains so memorable to you today?
Um, well, actually, it was after I stopped flying commercially. That's not quite true. While I was still at home, I took a course at our local college in black and white photography, and I really loved it, but I didn't continue with it. But I did have a camera. So then after I stopped flying and I moved to Mexico, to Cozumel, I worked there as a scuba dive master and managing a scuba dive shop. But I started taking photos of the Maya archaeological sites and the modern Maya, so the living Maya. And I did presentations, and people liked what I had to say, and I encouraged the visitors, and I did it. The presentations were for the tourists who came to Mexico, and the tourists liked what I had to say, and I encouraged them to go visit the Maya archaeological sites and get a tour with a Mayan guide. And but they also liked the photos, and I had artistically arranged photos of basically piles of rocks in many cases, right? Because a lot of the structures of that were 1500 years old were not obviously in pristine condition at these Maya archaeological sites. And so that was just instrumental, and I started doing more lectures, and I got more and more feedback, positive feedback. And then I started branching out and doing lots of photography and submitting to National Geographic, the Smithsonian, major newspapers. And of course that in itself is validating when people like your photos and people buy your photos. So I guess it would have to be Mexico that was still near and dear to my heart, for sure.
Mm. Okay. And then as we get very coming down to the last few minutes in the day's show, do you plan, Lola, to take your adventures and incorporate them into a novel? I can see what you're doing. You could even come out with a series that could take off. Has that ever crossed your mind?
It has, and in fact, one of the drawbacks of writing a memoir is um, you're revealing the truth, and you're revealing the truth as it pertains to you, which can be very upsetting, and it can be cathartic, but it can also be very upsetting. But in this case, for this book, I wanted it to be a memoir rather than a novel, because some of the stuff that happened, I thought people would say, oh, that's easy to make up for a novel, but that would never happen
Mm.
in real life. So
Hmm.
the next book is also a memoir, but about the Maya and my experience living with people who have so little or so few material possessions, but are so rich in many other ways, and come from one of the most spectacular and brilliant civilizations the world has ever seen. And yes, I do like to write short stories, though, and maybe there'll be a short story collection, because one of my favorite genres in not in fiction is the short story. I just find that has packed such a punch. But there are a couple authors I love, Anne Patchett and Barbara Kingsolver are two of my favorite novelists.
Okay. And can you just tell us the title of your second book? And is it already out?
No, no, but it's coming a lot more quickly than the first book. So it was 2014 when I got inspired to write Highway to the Sky and Aviator's Journey, but it took 10 years to get published, because very quickly I realized I need to take courses in how to write creatively my story. So I went through, I studied at Gotham Writers, New York City. I studied at Wesleyan University, also in America. And then because I'm Canadian, I went to the University of Toronto in the creative writing department. But with the next book, because I was doing a project, a long term or longitudinal ethnographic study, I've taken all kinds of notes. So I've already got about 35,000 words written in the next book, which is, I think, going to be called Maya Loom. It would be Maya, Mayalum, which means Maya lands, my time in the Maya lands.
Oh,
Well, that's the
wow.
working title now, but I'm pretty sure about that. Um, this one, Highway to the Sky and Aviator's Journey, I deliberated with 4 or 5 different titles, and finally, with a friend of mine and my publisher, we worked out this one, and I'm really happy with the title and the cover. I'm thrilled to bits, actually.
Okay. Can you please share 3 to 4 steps that you've taken, Lola, that you found to be effective personally for getting the word out about your books?
Oh gosh. Well, I've done lots of publications online, that is on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I am on X, but I don't use that nearly as much. I do a lot of outreach. I'm the co-lead for the 99's International Organization of Women Pilots in our local chapter here, the first Canadian chapter in Ontario. I'm the co-lead for the Education and Outreach Committee, so I do public presentations to libraries, to schools, to service clubs. Um, I have also done a lot of official book launches or author events, which have been successful because I usually do a short, depends, 10 to 30 minute personally narrated PowerPoint presentation
Mm.
talking about women in aviation history, past and present, and some of the early female aviators. And so that's been quite successful. It's a sort of a win-win. I sell the book, but I also get the word out about other female aviators and some of their personal journeys as well. I think that's been a big selling point as well. And if, and then encouraging people to buy my book, of course, and then to write reviews on Amazon and Indigo here in Canada, as well as Barnes and Noble and Books a Million. So
Okay.
it's been a lot of work. I mean, getting the book published, writing the book was hard, getting it published was hard, and but once you do that, boy, the job is not done.
Yeah, no. You gotta get out of here. And the good thing though is you can keep generally promoting your book forever and ever and ever. But can you tell off the shelf listeners where they can get copies of Highway to the Sky and Aviator's Journey?
Well, it is available at independent bookstores. Now, I can't say that if you went down to your local independent bookstore, you'd find it on the shelf, but you can get it from, and that is, order it online from an independent bookstore, and you can get it at Amazon.com for Canadian listeners, Amazon.ca, and Indigo chapters, which is in Canada, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble, and it's available in print and edition as well. And I'm working on an audiobook. Not
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm hoping to read it myself because I think myself, I love listening to audiobooks, but especially those memoirs narrated by the author. It just gives it
Mm.
more of a punch.
Yes. Oh my goodness, we have had the pleasure of having here with us today Lola Reid Allin. Oh my goodness. She's the author of the book Highway to the Sky and Aviator's Journey and working on her second book. And she's just traveled so much, but her second book is the meaning of it is My Time in the Maya Lands. Oh my God, or Maya Lands. What a pleasure. If you came in midstream on today's show, no worries. Once it finishes, the show finishes streaming and it goes out for you to download. You can listen to it and share it, and listen to it as many times as you want. And I want to give you Lola's website URL again. It's lolareidallin.com, LOLAReidallin.com. Again, she's the author of the book Highway to the Sky, An Aviator's Journey. Just look for Lola Reid Allin when you look for that title. Oh my goodness, please go out and support her with her book. If you like
Well,
audiobooks, I know some people have told me they only listen to audiobooks. She's
oh, I
coming
love
out with
the
an audiobook. Some people have told me they do not like paperbacks. They only read ebooks. It's available in an ebook. Some people only, I'm one of them. I do paperbacks. So everybody is different. So if
Yes,
you,
absolutely. You can
everybody's
also get
different.
it. Oh, sorry. You can also get it at your local libraries in many cases. I can't, again, I can't guarantee that, but you could ask your library. They can bring it in, which is also good. I'm also, and I forgot to mention, I'm going to be in Denver at Tattered Cover on March 28th, which is a Friday. And I'm going to be there from 5:30 to 7 for any listeners who are in Denver.
Okay, Denver listeners, you can meet Lola Reid out in person. You get to read her as you learn more about her travels, her journeys, her photography, and Highway to the Sky, an Aviator's Journey. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Lola, for being here with us today. You've been such a just an absolute treasure, and thank you for living an inspiration, just an inspiring life by just going after what you wanted despite the odds.
Well,
And
Denise, it's been
yes,
my pleasure.
and to our listeners, as I always tell you, you are so amazing. You are just incredible. Go out and create a fabulous day for yourself today. And I'll see you back here next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Off the Shelf. Tell book lovers everywhere to catch Off the Shelf books. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Miss Lola.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.